My mother handed me a glass of red wine with a strange smile at my engagement party. It smelled off. I swapped it with my sister. 15 minutes later, she collapsed and my mother screamed at me, asking why I had not drunk it. Before I tell you how I exposed their murderous plot, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to survive the people who were supposed to protect you. I am Aaliyah, and my engagement party in the upscale Buckhead district of Atlanta was supposed to be the crowning achievement of my life. My fiancé Dante, a powerful attorney, had spared no expense. The garden was filled with white roses, and the air buzzed with the chatter of the city elite. But then Mama Desiree stepped up to the head table. She held a crystal goblet filled with a dark red liquid that caught the light ominously. The music died down as she tapped a spoon against the glass, commanding the attention of every senator and CEO in attendance. Ice. Drink this, Aaliyah, she announced, her voice projecting to the back of the garden. It is a family tradition passed down from my grandmother. A special blend of herbs and vintage wine to calm a bride's nerves and ensure fertility. The guests clapped politely, unaware of the malice radiating from her. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. My mother never followed traditions unless she invented them to manipulate someone. Usually it was just a ploy for money or control, but this felt different. There was a hunger in her eyes today. I took the glass. It felt heavy in my hand, colder than it should have been. Everyone was watching me, waiting for the dutiful daughter to perform. Drink up, Aaliyah, Mama Desiree urged, stepping closer, her perfume overpowering the scent of the flowers. Don't embarrass me in front of Dante partners. I raised it to my lips, intending to take a polite sip, just to appease her and end the spectacle. That is when the smell hit me. Under the notes of expensive oak and berry was the distinct sharp scent of bitter almonds. I froze. My work as a forensic accountant and crisis manager had taught me to notice the tiny details others missed, and I knew that scent. It was not herbs, it was chemical. It smelled like cyanide, or perhaps a heavy dose of a paralytic agent I had read about in case files. I lowered the glass slightly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked across the room, searching for an escape. In the corner near the DJ booth, my younger sister Bianca and her husband Chad were holding up their phones, recording. They were not smiling with joy or sisterly affection. They were smirking with dark anticipation, waiting for me to fall. They knew. They all knew. I tightened my grip on the crystal stem of the goblet. I knew I had to lose this glass, but I could not just pour it out on the grass. Mama Desiree was watching me like a hawk, her eyes tracking every movement of her special blend. I needed chaos. Controlled chaos. I spotted Chad still filming me a few feet away. He was wearing a custom white linen suit that probably cost more than my first car, funded entirely by the money he had embezzled from our family business accounts. He was the perfect target. I took a breath, and then I let my knee buckle. It was a move I had practiced in self-defense classes, not for engagement parties, but survival is survival. I lurched forward with a convincing cry of alarm. My shoulder collided hard with Chad's chest. I made sure to jerk my hand just enough to send a splash of red wine from a waiter passing tray, not my glass, onto his pristine lapel. The reaction was instantaneous. Chad yelped, dropping his phone to the manicured grass to swat at the stain. "Oh my God, my suit!" he shouted, his vanity instantly overriding his malice. The guests gasped and turned. Mama Desiree's eyes snapped away from me to her son-in-law, her face twisting in annoyance. For 3 seconds, nobody was looking at my hands. That was all I needed. With the precision of a magician, I placed the poisoned goblet on the high cocktail table right next to Bianca's half-empty glass of Chardonnay. In the same fluid motion, I slid her glass toward me and pushed the deadly red wine toward her hand. It happened in a heartbeat. By the time Chad had retrieved his phone and Mama had composed herself, I was standing there looking mortified, holding a glass of white wine, while the red poison sat innocently next to my sister. "I am so clumsy," I stammered, playing the part of the nervous bride to perfection. "I am so sorry, Chad." Mama Desiree marched over, her face tight with irritation. Aaliyah, really, you are making a scene. Drink the wine and calm down. She did not even notice I was holding a different glass. She was too focused on maintaining the perfect image. I lifted the glass of Chardonnay to my lips, my hand trembling just enough to sell the act. But before I could take a sip, Bianca scoffed. She looked at the crystal goblet of red wine sitting on her table. The one Mama had announced was a special family tradition, the one meant to bless the bride. Bianca could never stand for me to have anything special. Her entitlement was a gravitational force that sucked everything into her orbit. If it was exclusive, she wanted it. If it was mine, she needed it. You do not deserve Mama blessing, she sneered loud enough for Dante family to hear. You are just going to ruin it, like you ruin everything. She reached out and grabbed the goblet. My breath hitched in my throat. I wanted to scream, stop. I wanted to slap it out of her hand. For a split second, the sisterly instinct to protect her flared up, but then I remembered the smirk on her face when she handed me the glass. I remembered the text messages I had found on her phone plotting to take Dante. I froze, paralyzed by the sudden shift in gravity. Bianca swirled the dark liquid, looking at me with a challenge in her eyes. To the favorite daughter, she toasted, mocking me with a cruel smile. And then she tipped her head back. I watched in slow motion as the dark red liquid disappeared. She drank it all. Every drop of the bitter almond cocktail meant for me. She slammed the empty glass down on the table and wiped her mouth, a triumphant smirk plastered on her face. It tasted terrible, she said, wrinkling her nose, like old medicine. But it is better than you deserve. I stared at her, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. You have no idea what you just did, I thought. You just drank your own mother hatred. And now we wait. The band had faded into a soft jazz interlude. Dante looked magnificent in his tuxedo, holding his champagne flute high. He was midway through a speech about partnership and loyalty. I was standing next to him, my hand in his, trying to keep my breathing even. I kept glancing at the clock on my phone. 15 minutes. That was how long it took for most fast-acting neurotoxins or heavy sedatives to metabolize. Across the room, Bianca was leaning heavily against a marble pillar. Her skin had taken on a clammy gray sheen beneath her layers of foundation. She was sweating profusely despite the cool evening breeze. Suddenly, she let out a giggle. It started low, a wet, bubbling sound that seemed to claw its way out of her throat. Then it grew louder, louder, until it was a full-blown cackle that echoed off the garden walls, drowning out Dante's heartfelt words. The guests turned heads, swiveling in unison. Mama Desiree hissed from the front row, "Bianca, stop it. Have some dignity." But dignity had left the building along with Bianca motor functions. She pushed off the pillar, her heels skidding on the grass. She looked like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and terrifyingly empty. She stumbled toward the stage, her movements jerky and erratic. Dante stopped speaking, concern furrowing his brow. "Is she okay?" he whispered to me. Before I could answer, Bianca lunged. She snatched the microphone from his hand with a feral speed that shocked everyone. The feedback squealed through the speakers, causing the senator in the front row to cover his ears. Bianca ignored it. She swayed in the spotlight, a grotesque parody of the perfect sister. "Oh, look at him," she slurred, pointing a shaking finger directly at Chad, who was standing near the buffet table, trying to clean the wine stain off his jacket. "My husband, my loving husband." She laughed again, that manic sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. The drug was stripping away her filter, tearing down every social grace she had ever learned. It was turning her inside out. "You all think he is so perfect, don't you?" She screeched into the mic, her voice distorted and harsh. "Mr. Real Estate Mogul, Mr. Buckhead Prince." She leaned in close to the microphone, her lips brushing the metal grate. He is a fraud, a cheating, lying fraud. I know about the blonde hostess at the Velvet Room, Chad. I saw the texts. I saw the pictures. Chad face drained of color. He looked like he was about to vomit. He started moving toward her, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Bianca, shut up," he hissed. But she was just getting started. And you want to know the best part? She yelled, her voice cracking. He cannot even get it up. Not with me, not with her, not without his little blue pills. He is useless. Useless in bed, useless with money. He is a leech. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that sucked the air out of the room. 100 of Atlanta's wealthiest, most influential people stood frozen mouths agape, staring at the woman who was currently destroying her marriage and her reputation in real time. I watched in horror and fascination. This was the madness Mama Desiree had intended for me. This public humiliation, this loss of control, this absolute destruction of character. It was supposed to be me screaming obscenities. It was supposed to be me ruining my engagement. But instead it was their golden child, their precious Bianca, who was tearing their facade apart piece by ugly piece. Bianca's manic laughter cut off abruptly like a radio cord being yanked. Her hands flew to her throat, clawing at the diamond necklace Mama had gifted her just hours ago. Her skin turned a terrifying shade of ash gray. Then the retching started. It was a guttural, violent sound that echoed through the silent garden. Before anyone could move, she bent double and expelled a torrent of dark, viscous fluid. It was not just wine. It was bile and blood staining the front of her $10,000 couture gown in a gruesome, abstract pattern. The smell of copper and bitter almonds filled the air, making the nearby guests recoil in horror. She tried to stand, but her legs gave way completely. She hit the stage floor with a bone-jarring thud that vibrated through the microphone she had dropped. Then the convulsions began. Her body arched unnaturally, her heels drumming a frantic rhythm against the wood. White foam tinged with pink bubbled past her lips. It was a scene from a nightmare. Mama Desiree let out a scream that tore through the night. It was the primal, terrified shriek of a mother watching her favorite child wither. She scrambled up the steps of the stage, ignoring her arthritis, ignoring the stairs, ignoring the vomit on the floor as she fell to her knees beside Bianca. She tried to hold Bianca's shoulders, but the seizures were too violent. Then she turned her head. She locked eyes with me across the crowd. Her face was contorted not with grief, but with a sudden realization that shattered her sanity. She pointed a trembling finger at me accusingly, her voice shrill and hysterical. "Aaliyah, what did you do? You were supposed to drink it. I told you to drink that specific glass. Why is she dying instead of you?" The silence that followed was heavier than the humid Atlanta air. Every head turned toward me, then back to my mother. The implication hung there naked and undeniable. She had not asked why Bianca was sick. She had asked why I was not. She had revealed the target. Dante stepped in front of me, a protective wall against the accusation, but his eyes were wide with shock. He had heard it too. Everyone had. In the distance, the wail of sirens grew louder, cutting through the stunned paralysis of the party. Blue and red lights began to flash against the high hedges, casting the scene in a grotesque strobe effect. The paramedics burst through the garden gates, their radios crackling with urgency. But as they rushed to save my sister, I stood rooted to the spot, watching my mother sob over the daughter she loved, while cursing the daughter she had tried to destroy. The mask had finally slipped, and the monster underneath was uglier than I could have ever imagined. I sat on the narrow bench seat of the ambulance, my knees bumping against the stretcher where my sister lay intubated. The air inside smelled of antiseptic and the metallic tang of blood. The red strobe lights flashed against the windows, creating a disorienting rhythm that matched the pounding in my skull. I looked at Bianca's face. It was slack and pale, her expensive makeup streaked with sweat and vomit. The paramedics were working frantically, shouting vitals to each other, their hands moving in a blur to stabilize her heart rate. A normal mother would be holding her child's hand. A normal mother would be praying. But Mama Desiree was not a normal mother. She was not looking at the daughter fighting for her life. She was looking at me. Her eyes were black holes of rage. She lunged across the narrow aisle, her perfectly manicured nails aiming for my face. "You did this!" she hissed, her voice low and venomous under the wail of the siren. "You switched the glasses. I know you did." I caught her wrist before she could scratch me. Her skin felt feverish. I did not do anything, Mama, I said coldly, pushing her hand away. I just declined a drink that smelled like death. If you knew it was safe, why are you so angry that Bianca drank it? The logic bounced off her like bullets off Kevlar. She did not care about logic. She only cared that her plan had backfired. You jealous little witch, she spat, smoothing her dress as if appearance still mattered in the back of an ambulance. You think just because you paid for the venue and the catering you own us. You think writing checks makes you better than her. There it was. The truth I had suspected but never wanted to admit. The $75,000 I had wired to her account for this engagement party. The down payment I had made on the condo Bianca and Chad lived in. The monthly allowance I sent to keep Mama in her Buckhead mansion. To her, I was not a daughter. I was just a bank account. A resource to be drained until it was dry and then discarded. You paid for the wine too, she growled, her face inches from mine. You paid for the very poison that is killing her. Do you see the irony, Aaliyah? You funded your own sister murder. I looked at her, at the woman who gave birth to me, and I felt nothing but a hollow, icy void. She was not worried that Bianca might die. She was worried that her golden child might not survive to inherit the money she planned to steal from me. Paramedic in the front shouted for us to sit back as the ambulance swerved through traffic. Mama Desiree slumped back against the wall, but her glare never wavered. When we get to the hospital, I am going to tell the police everything she threatened. I will tell them you forced her to drink it. I will tell them you are unstable. Nobody will believe you. I stared at her calmly. My engagement ring caught the flashing emergency lights. You can tell them whatever you want, Mama, I replied. But remember, I am the one who pays for the lawyers. And after tonight, the Bank of Aaliyah is permanently closed. For the first time, fear flickered behind her rage. Not fear for Bianca, fear for her lifestyle. As the ambulance screeched into the hospital bay, I knew the war had just begun. The automatic doors of the VIP waiting room slid open with a soft hiss. The air inside was freezing and smelled of expensive lilies and antiseptic. I walked in my heels, clicking sharply on the polished tile. Dante was already there, pacing the length of the room, his tuxedo jacket discarded, his tie loosened. When he saw me, relief washed over his face, but before he could reach me, the double doors burst open again. Chad stormed in. His white linen suit was a disaster, stained with wine and sweat, his face a mask of purple rage. He did not look at Dante. He locked eyes with me and roared like a wounded animal. "You did this, you jealous freak!" He lunged across the room, his fist raised. He was aiming straight for my face, intending to hurt, intending to silence me. I flinched, bracing for the impact, but it never came. Dante moved with the speed of a striking cobra. He caught Chad's wrist mid-air, twisting it back until Chad yelped in pain and dropped to his knees. "Do not ever touch my fiancée." Dante growled, his voice low and vibrating with a dangerous promise. "If you even look at her wrong again, I will break your arm." He shoved Chad backward, sending him sprawling onto the designer carpet. Chad scrambled away, clutching his wrist, panting heavily. "You do not understand," Chad spat, looking up at us with wild, desperate eyes. "She poisoned Bianca. She tried to kill her own sister because she cannot stand that we are happy." I stared at him, disgusted. "Happy? You call stealing money and cheating on your wife happy?" But before I could speak, Mama Desiree made her entrance. She did not storm in like Chad. She stumbled in, supported by a nurse weeping theatrically into a silk handkerchief. She saw the lead physician Dr. Evans approaching with a clipboard. Immediately her posture changed. She slumped against the nurse, her knees buckling slightly, a perfect performance of a grieving mother. "Doctor, please, you have to save my baby," she wailed, grabbing Dr. Evans' lab coat. "And you have to help my other daughter, too." She pointed a shaking finger at me, tears streaming down her face. "Aaliyah is not well. She has been having episodes again. She stopped taking her medication weeks ago." I gasped. I had never been on medication for mental health in my life. This was a lie, a fabrication designed to discredit me before I could speak. Mama continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She has always been jealous of Bianca. Tonight she finally snapped. She put something in that wine, doctor. I saw her. She thinks Bianca is trying to steal her fiancé. Please, you have to commit her for observation before she hurts anyone else. Dr. Evans looked at me, his expression wary. I stood tall, smoothing my dress, refusing to look like the unhinged woman she was painting me to be. I am perfectly sane, doctor, I said, my voice ice cold. But I suggest you ask my mother why she is so desperate to lock me away before the toxicology report comes back. Mama Desiree stopped crying instantly, her eyes narrowing into slits. The trap was set. Dr. Evans cleared his throat, his expression grave as he looked down at the tablet in his hands. We have the preliminary toxicology screen back, he announced, his voice cutting through the tension in the waiting room. It was not food poisoning, and it certainly was not just alcohol. He looked directly at Mama Desiree. Your daughter's system is flooded with a highly concentrated mixture of two very specific substances. First, we found dangerous levels of a synthetic deliriant, a street drug designed to induce temporary psychosis and violent hallucinations. That explains the behavioral outburst, but the second substance is even more concerning. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. We found massive amounts of a potent abortifacient, a chemical compound used strictly to terminate pregnancies. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. My blood ran cold, freezing in my veins. Abortifacient, a drug to kill a fetus. My hand instinctively went to my flat stomach. I was not pregnant. Dante and I had been careful waiting until after the wedding. But then I remembered. 3 weeks ago, I had been nauseous at a family brunch recovering from a stomach bug. I remembered Mama Desiree watching me like a hawk when I refused a mimosa. I remembered Bianca whispering to Chad and giggling. They thought I was pregnant. They were convinced I was carrying Dante heir, the child that would cement my connection to his powerful family and secure my future. And they had tried to kill it. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The special family wine was not a blessing. It was a biological weapon. They wanted me to miscarry violently and publicly right there at my engagement party. They wanted me to bleed out on stage while the hallucinogen made me scream and rave like a lunatic. It was the perfect assassination of my character and my future. Dante would see his fiancée turn into a monster and lose his child in the same night. He would have no choice but to leave me. And then, with me broken, institutionalized, and single, Mama Desiree would step in with her power of attorney to take control of my assets. It was diabolical. It was evil. And it had failed only because I had spilled a drink. I looked at my mother. She was not looking at the doctor. She was looking at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fury. She knew exactly what was in that cup because she had put it there. She had tried to murder my unborn child, a child that did not even exist, just to keep her claws in my bank account. The sheer depravity of it took my breath away. Dr. Evans continued, oblivious to the silent war happening between mother and daughter. We need to know where she could have ingested this. If this was a deliberate poisoning, we are legally obligated to involve the police immediately. Mama Desiree finally spoke, her voice trembling not with sorrow, but with the desperate need to deflect. It must have been Aaliyah, she cried, pointing a shaking finger at me again. She gave Bianca that drink. She must have been trying to get rid of her own baby and got confused, or maybe she wanted to hurt Bianca because she is jealous that Bianca might be pregnant. It was a weak lie, a desperate pivot, but it was all she had left. I stepped forward, my fear replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Call the police, doctor, I said, my voice steady and loud. Call them right now. And while you are at it, test the dregs of the wineglass Chad dropped on the lawn. I think you will find your evidence there. Mama Desiree's face went gray. She knew as well as I did that the game was changing. She had aimed for my womb, but she had struck her own heart instead. The hospital corridor was a sterile maze of white walls and hushed voices. I had managed to slip away from the waiting room while Dante was arguing with hospital security about Chad's presence. I needed to know the full extent of their plan. I needed to hear it from their own lips. I found Bianca's room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, just enough to let a sliver of light spill onto the polished floor. I pressed my back against the wall, holding my breath, straining to hear over the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor inside. Bianca's voice was weak, raspy from the violent retching, but the venom in it was unmistakable. "Why does it hurt so much, Mama?" she whined. "You said it was just a little something to make her act crazy. You said she would just embarrass herself and pass out." Mama Desiree's voice was a harsh whisper, urgent and panicked. "Keep your voice down, you fool. The dosage was for her, not for you. You drank the whole thing like a greedy pig. That was enough to knock out a horse. I told you to wait. I told you to watch." Bianca started to cry, the sound pathetic and self-pitying. But I wanted it. I wanted to see her fall. "You promised Mama. You promised me that once she drank it, Dante would leave her. You said he would see her acting like a lunatic, and he would call off the wedding right there. And then you said her money would be ours. You said I could have her house. You said Chad's debts would be paid off." I closed my eyes, fighting back a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with poison. It was not just about ruining my reputation. It was a complete hostile takeover of my life. They had scripted my destruction down to the last detail. My humiliation, my heartbreak, my financial ruin, all of it plotted over brunch while I was paying their bills. It was not enough for them to live off my generosity. They wanted to consume me whole. "Hush now," Mama snapped. But there was a tremor of fear in her voice. "We can still fix this. We just need to stick to the story. Aaliyah gave you the drink. She was acting strange all night. She is the unstable one. If we say it enough times, people will believe us. People always believe the grieving mother and the victim's sister. But what about the baby?" Bianca sobbed. "What if I can't have babies now, Mama? The doctor said the drugs were strong. What if you ruined me instead of her?" There was a pause, a chilling silence that spoke volumes. Then Mama's voice came back colder than I had ever heard it. "Better you than her keeping it," she muttered. "At least you would share the child support money. Aaliyah would have kept it all for herself. Just rest, Bianca. When you wake up, we will make sure the police know exactly who to blame." I stepped away from the door, my hands shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, burning rage. They were monsters, and monsters did not deserve mercy. They deserved to be hunted. I backed away from Bianca's door, my stomach churning with a mixture of disgust and vindication. I had the recording. I had the proof of their conspiracy. I turned to head back to the waiting room to find Dante, but a movement at the end of the corridor stopped me cold. It was Chad. He was pacing near the vending machines, chewing on his fingernails until they bled. He looked like a man on the edge of a cliff. When Mama Desiree emerged from Bianca's room, wiping her fake tears and adjusting her pearls, Chad pounced on her. He did not see me standing in the shadows of the alcove. He grabbed Mama Desiree by the arm, his fingers digging into her fleshy upper arm with bruising force. He dragged her roughly into the service corridor, away from the nurse's station. I crept closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. I needed to hear this. I needed every scrap of ammunition I could get. Chad's voice was a low growl, a sound that vibrated with suppressed violence. "You need to fix this, Desiree," he hissed, getting right in her face. His charm was gone. The facade of the successful real estate broker had melted away, leaving only a desperate, sweating junkie. "You promised me this would work. You said she would drink the wine, she would go crazy, and we would have power of attorney by morning." Mama Desiree tried to pull away, but he yanked her back. "I am trying, Chad," she whispered harshly, glancing around nervously. But Bianca ruined it. She was too greedy. "Do not blame Bianca." Chad spat. "This is on you. You said you could control Aaliyah. You said she was weak. Well, she does not look weak to me. She looks like she is about to call the cops. And if she does, if she looks into the accounts, I am a dead man." "What accounts?" Mama asked, her voice trembling. Chad laughed a dry, humorless bark. "All of them. I leveraged the house Desiree. I leveraged the condo. I borrowed against the business. I owe people, bad people, not banks. I owe loan sharks $5 million. I lost it all on crypto futures and poker. They gave me until Monday. Monday, Desiree. If I do not have access to Aaliyah Trust Fund by then, they are not just coming for me. They are coming for you. They are coming for Bianca. They will burn your precious mansion to the ground with us inside it. Mama Desiree's face went slack with horror. 5 million, she gasped. You told me it was just a liquidity issue. You lied to me. Chad shook her again hard enough to make her head snap back. We are past lying, old woman. We are in survival mode. You go back in there and you make sure the doctors believe Aaliyah is the crazy one. You make sure Dante leaves her. You get me that power of attorney, or I swear to God I will throw you to the wolves myself to save my own skin. Do you understand me? He shoved her away and she stumbled, hitting the wall. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from gasping. It was not just greed. It was a death sentence. They were cornered rats, and they were willing to eat me alive just to survive their own mistakes. I walked back into the VIP waiting area. Dante was off the phone instantly. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip tight and reassuring. I have the district attorney on the personal line, he said, his voice a low rumble of controlled fury. And I have the chief of police on the other. One word from you, Aaliyah, and this hospital goes on lockdown. We will have Chad in cuffs for assault, and your mother in an interrogation room for attempted poisoning within the hour. He looked ready to burn the world down for me. It was tempting. So tempting to just let the system take over. To let the flashing lights and the handcuffs end the nightmare right now. But then I remembered Chad's words about the loan sharks. I remembered Mama Desiree's sneer about my money. Arresting them was too easy, it was too clean. The legal system in Atlanta was slow, and money could buy delays. Chad would claim addiction. Mama would claim ignorance or senility. They might get a few years in minimum security or probation. They would still have the house. They would still have the status. They would still win. I reached out and took the phone from Dante's hand. I ended the call. No police, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Calm. Dead. Not yet. Dante looked at me like I had lost my mind. Aaliyah, they tried to kill you. They poisoned your sister by mistake, but the intent was murder. You cannot protect them anymore. This is not about family loyalty. This is about survival. I am not protecting them, I replied, looking him dead in the eye. I am hunting them. I pulled him down to sit on the leather sofa, away from the prying ears of the nurses. If we arrest them now, they get lawyers. They get bail. They get to spin the narrative in the press. Chad goes to rehab. Mama plays the victim. They keep the assets I paid for. They survive. I leaned in closer, my hand gripping his knee. I do not want them to survive Dante. I want them obliterated. I want Chad facing his loan sharks without a penny to his name. I want Mama watching the bank foreclose on her mansion while she stands on the curb. I want Bianca to realize she has nothing left to inherit. Dante stared at me. He was seeing a side of me I usually kept hidden behind my spreadsheets and audits. The side that knew how to follow the money until it bled. The side that had dragged myself up from nothing while they pulled me down. What are you saying? He asked quietly. I am saying that prison is free room and board, I whispered. I want them destitute. I want them to feel every ounce of fear I felt tonight. I have a plan, Dante, but I need you to trust me. We are going to play their game for 24 hours. We are going to let them think they won, and then I am going to take everything. Dante looked at me for a long moment, searching my face. Then he slowly nodded, a dark appreciation growing in his eyes. Okay, he said. We do it your way. But I stay by your side every second. Deal, I said. Now let us go tell them I am ready to negotiate. I returned to the VIP waiting room, expecting to find a scene of mourning. Instead, I found a war room. Mama Desiree had dried her tears and reapplied her lipstick. Chad was typing furiously on his phone, probably holding off his bookies for a few more hours. When they saw me and Dante approach, the shift in the atmosphere was palpable. They were no longer the grieving family. They were the sharks circling the water. Mama stood up, her face arranged into a mask of tragic concern that made my stomach turn. "Aaliyah, baby?" she said, her voice loud enough for the nurses stationed to hear. "We need to talk about damage control. The press is already outside. They are asking about Bianca overdose." I stared at her. Overdose? She was already spinning the narrative. "What do you want, Mama?" I asked, cutting through her performance. "I want to save you," she replied, stepping closer, her perfume suffocating me. "We know you did not mean to hurt your sister. We know you are having one of your episodes. But the police will not understand that. If they find out you switched the glasses, they will charge you with attempted murder." Chad stepped up beside her, crossing his arms. He looked smug for a man who was $5 million in debt. "It is called depraved indifference, Aaliyah," he said, using legal terms he definitely learned from television. "You knew the drink was bad. You gave it to her anyway. That is 20 years in prison, unless we help you." I felt Dante tense beside me, ready to explode, but I squeezed his hand. I needed to hear the offer. "Help me," how I asked, playing the terrified victim they wanted to see. Mama Desiree sighed as if this was the hardest decision of her life. "We need to protect the family assets," she said. "You are clearly not in a right state of mind to manage your portfolio. If the press gets wind of this, the stock prices of your clients will tank. We need you to sign a temporary power of attorney, just until you get better, just until the scandal blows over. Chad will manage the accounts for you. We will tell the police it was an accident. We will send you to a nice private facility in Switzerland to rest." There it was, the end game. They did not just want the money. They wanted me gone, locked away in a facility where I could not check bank statements or talk to auditors. They wanted to declare me mentally incompetent so they could bleed me dry legally. It was the conservatorship trap, and they had sprung it perfectly. Or so they thought. If I refused, they would go to the press with the story that I poisoned my sister in a fit of jealous rage. They would ruin my reputation, my career, and my life. If I agreed, they would steal everything I had built. It was a binary choice designed to leave me with nothing. But they had forgotten one thing. I was the one who balanced the books. I was the one who knew where the bodies were buried, and I knew exactly how to lie to a liar. I let my shoulders slump. I let a tremor enter my hands, visible enough for them to see. I looked at Dante with wide, fearful eyes, then back at my mother. "Switzerland." I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly on the last syllable. "You would really send me away?" Mama Desiree's face softened into that fake maternal concern she wore so well. "It is for your own good, baby. You need rest. You need to heal. And we need to make sure the family is safe." I looked down at the floor, hiding the cold calculation in my eyes. They thought they had won. They thought I was the same little girl who used to beg for their approval. They had no idea I was the one who had audited their shell companies last year without them knowing. "Okay," I said, letting a tear slip down my cheek. "Okay, Mama. I will do it. I just want this nightmare to end. I do not want to go to jail." Chad let out a breath he had been holding, his smug grin returning instantly. "Smart choice, Aaliyah. We will take good care of the money. Do not worry about a thing." Dante made a noise of protest, but I silenced him with a quick squeeze of his hand. He looked at me, confusion warring with trust in his eyes. He stayed silent, playing his part. "We cannot do it here," I said, wiping my eyes. "I need to go home. I need to pack. Can we meet tomorrow? At the house. I will sign everything then." Mama Desiree exchanged a look with Chad. A look of triumph. A look of predators who had just cornered their prey. "Tomorrow is fine," she said, patting my arm patronizingly. "Noon. Do not be late, Aaliyah. And do not try anything stupid. We have the doctors on our side." I nodded meekly, letting Dante lead me out of the waiting room. As we walked away, I could feel their eyes on my back, burning with greed. They were already spending my money in their heads. They were already planning the redecoration of my house. They were so blinded by their victory, they did not see the knife I was sharpening. They did not know that tomorrow at noon I would not be signing away my life. I would be signing their warrants. Outside the hospital, the air was thick and humid, but it felt clean compared to the poison inside. Dante opened the car door for me, his movements stiff with suppressed rage. "Aaliyah, what are you doing?" he asked as soon as we were inside. "You cannot sign those papers. They will lock you up and throw away the key." I turned to him. My tears gone, my expression hard as diamond. "I am not signing anything, Dante. I am buying time. I need 24 hours. 24 hours to gather the evidence. 24 hours to trace the money. 24 hours to build a case so airtight they will never see the light of day again. Drive Dante. Take me to my office. The real one, not the one they know about. Tonight we work. Tomorrow we execute." Dante drove in silence until we reached the underground garage of the Meridian Tower. My family believed I lived in a tasteful two-bedroom condo near the park. They believed my car was a lease. They believed my life was comfortable, but ultimately dependent on the salary they assumed I made as a standard CPA. They were wrong about everything. I placed my hand on the biometric scanner by the elevator. It chirped and whisked us up to the penthouse floor. This was not just my home. It was the headquarters of Chimera Analytics. My mother thought I balanced books for local businesses. In reality, I spent my days tracking terrorist financing, money laundering schemes, and corporate embezzlement for clients who paid 7 figures for my discretion. I was not just an accountant. I was a financial assassin. The doors slid open, revealing a room bathed in the cool blue glow of server racks and wall-to-wall monitors. The air was kept at a constant 65 degrees to protect the equipment. I kicked off my heels and walked barefoot across the slate floor, feeling the hum of the processors beneath my feet. This was my domain. This was where I was a god. Dante watched me, his expression shifting from worry to awe. He had seen this room before, but he had never seen me like this. The tearful, terrified woman from the hospital was gone. In her place was the predator who had taken down a Ponzi scheme worth $500 million last year, without breaking a sweat. I sat in my ergonomic chair and woke the system. 3 massive screens flared to life. I did not need a password. The system recognized my retina scan. I cracked my knuckles and began to type. The sound of the mechanical keyboard was the only noise in the room, a rapid-fire staccato like gunfire. I needed to know exactly how deep Chad Hole was. I needed to see the dirt under his fingernails. I bypassed the standard banking portals. Those were for amateurs. I utilized a backdoor algorithm I had designed myself, one that scraped data from offshore accounts, crypto exchanges, and shadow banking ledgers. I typed in Chad full legal name. Chadwick Jameson Miller. The screen scrolled through lines of code, searching, connecting, verifying. My family thought they were smart, hiding their secrets. But money always leaves a trail. It leaves a scent like blood in the water. And I was the shark. The system pinged a soft sound that signaled a hit. Then another. And another. Data began to cascade down the center monitor. Bank of the Caymans. Shell companies in Delaware. Wire transfers to accounts flagged for illegal gambling syndicates. I watched the numbers fly by my eyes, tracking the flow of stolen cash. Chad was not just in debt. He was drowning in an ocean of his own making. He had been siphoning money from every account he could touch, including the trust fund Mama Desiree thought was secure. I leaned back, a cold smile touching my lips. I had found the thread. Now I just had to pull it until their entire world unraveled. The file on Chadwick Jameson Miller was a masterclass in deception. My mother bragged about his real estate empire constantly. She told anyone who would listen at church that her son-in-law was closing million-dollar deals in Midtown. I pulled up his license history on the state board database. It was blank. Chad had never held a real estate license in the state of Georgia. He had failed the exam 3 times and then simply stopped trying. Instead, he had built a career on smoke and mirrors, using free website templates to create a fake brokerage firm that listed properties he did not represent. But that was just the surface-level fraud. The real horror story was in his transaction history. I scrolled through page after page of outgoing wires. He was not buying properties. He was hemorrhaging cash into the black hole of high-stakes online poker and volatile crypto futures. The logs showed massive transfers to unregulated exchanges in Malta and the Philippines. He had lost $600,000 in a single night last November, betting on a meme coin that crashed to 0 hours later. He was chasing his losses with the desperation of a drowning man grabbing at anchors. And when his own accounts ran dry, he started looking for other sources. That was when I found the document that made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. It was a lien against the Buckhead estate, the house my mother lived in. The house I bought and paid for 5 years ago to ensure she would always have a roof over her head. The title was in my name. It should have been untouchable. I pulled up the digitized mortgage application filed 3 months ago. My eyes scanned to the signature line at the bottom of the PDF. There it was. My signature. Or rather, a clumsy pixelated copy of my signature lifted from a birthday card I had sent 2 years ago and pasted onto the legal document. He had forged my consent to take out a $2 million line of credit against my property. He had stolen the equity from under my mother's feet, and she did not even know it. Or maybe she did. Dante leaned over my shoulder, his breath hitching as he read the screen. "That is a felony, Aaliyah," he said, his voice tight. "That is bank fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. He put your mother home at risk to pay his bookies." I zoomed in on the notary stamp. It belonged to a woman named Sarah Jenkins. I ran her name through my database. She was Chad's cousin. Of course she was. It was a family affair, a conspiracy of incompetence. Chad had gambled away everything he had, and then he had gambled away everything I had given them. He was not just a loser. He was a parasite who had burrowed into the foundation of my life and was eating it from the inside out. I saved the documents to an encrypted drive. This was not just evidence. This was the nail in his coffin. He thought he was a player. He thought he was smart. But he had just handed me the weapon I needed to destroy him, and I was going to enjoy pulling the trigger. I shifted my focus from Chad to the matriarch Mama Desiree. I needed to know if she was a victim of his con or a willing participant. I accessed her cloud account. It was pitifully easy. Her password was just her own name, followed by the year she won a minor beauty pageant. I navigated to her deleted emails folder, the digital trash can where guilty consciences try to hide their sins. And there it was, it. A thread from 2 months ago, subject line simply, "Problem." I opened it and felt the air leave my lungs. It was a message from Chad confessing everything. He told her about the gambling debts. He told her about the forged mortgage. He told her the bank was threatening to foreclose if they did not make a payment by the end of the quarter. A normal mother would have called the police. A normal mother would have called her daughter, the actual owner of the house, to warn her. But Mama Desiree was not a normal mother. She was a socialite drowning in delusion. Her reply was not one of outrage. It was a masterclass in narcissism. "You idiot," she wrote. "If the foreclosure notice goes public, I will be the laughingstock of the Buckhead Garden Club. Mrs. Henderson already suspects we are having cash flow issues. Fix this, Chad. I do not care how you do it, but do not let them take the house while I am chairing the spring gala." She knew. She knew he had committed a felony against me, and her only concern was her reputation at a garden club. She valued the opinion of women who gossiped about her behind her back more than she valued my financial security. But the next email was the dagger. It was dated 3 weeks ago, right after I had that stomach bug. Chad wrote, "We need liquidity, Desiree. Big liquidity. The loan sharks are not like the bank. They break legs." Mama's reply was short and chilling. "Aaliyah is pregnant," she wrote. "If she has that baby, she will lock down her assets for the child. But if something happens to her or the baby, if she becomes incapacitated, I have power of attorney in her medical file from that surgery she had years ago. We can declare her unfit. We can take control. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. It was not just Chad's idea. It was hers. She had orchestrated the timing. She had suggested the method. She decided that my sanity and my unborn child were acceptable sacrifices to keep her illusion of wealth alive. She looked at me not as a daughter, but as a harvestable organ, a resource to be consumed to cover up their failures. The last thread of attachment I had to her, the tiny child inside me, that still wanted her mommy, withered and died in that cold blue light. She was not my mother anymore. She was just another defendant. I thought I had seen the bottom of the barrel with Chad and Mama Desiree, but Bianca had one more surprise waiting for me. I navigated to her social media accounts, which were a carefully curated shrine to her vanity. But behind the filters and the hashtags lay a trail of desperation. Her direct messages were a litany of overdue notices from luxury boutiques and angry texts from friends she had borrowed money from and ghosted. She was living a champagne life on a tap water budget, and the tap had run dry. But it was her email drafts that revealed the depth of her betrayal. There was a draft addressed to Julian Thorne. The name made my blood boil. Julian was Dante's fiercest rival, a ruthless corporate raider who had been trying to destroy Dante family firm for years. The subject line read, "Insider Info." I opened the attachment and felt a wave of nausea. It was a dossier. Bianca had been spying on Dante. She had taken photos of documents he left on the kitchen counter when he visited. She had recorded snippets of his phone calls when he thought he was alone in the garden. She had compiled a list of his upcoming mergers, his confidential client list, and even sensitive information about a pending lawsuit that could bankrupt his firm if leaked. And the price for this treason? $50,000. She was selling out her future brother-in-law, the man who had welcomed her into his home, who had treated her with nothing but kindness, for the price of a few handbags and a weekend in Miami. In the body of the email she wrote, "I can get you more. My sister trusts me." She leaves her laptop open. "Just pay off my Neiman Marcus card and I will give you the keys to the kingdom." She was not just jealous. She was a corporate spy. She was willing to destroy Dante's career and by extension my future just to maintain her image as a wealthy socialite. I saved the draft and the attachments. This was leverage Dante would appreciate. It was also the final proof that Bianca was beyond redemption. She had drank the poison meant for me, but her soul had been poisoned long before tonight. She hated me not because I had done anything to her, but because I had everything she wanted and she was too lazy to earn it herself. She wanted the shortcuts. She wanted the cheat codes. Well, she was about to learn that in the real world, cheaters do not just get disqualified, they get destroyed. I closed her file and sat back in my chair. The family portrait was complete. A gambler, a narcissist, and a traitor. They were a perfect storm of toxicity and I was the lightning rod. But lightning strikes both ways. And they were about to get burned. I picked up the secure line on my desk. It was 3 a.m, but Sterling answered on the first ring. He was not just my personal attorney. He was the legal pit bull I kept on a heavy retainer for situations exactly like this. I did not waste time with pleasantries or explanations. I simply hit send on the encrypted file containing Chad mortgage fraud, Mama Desiree complicity emails, and Bianca corporate espionage dossier. I need everything, Sterling. I said, my voice steady and cold. I want the eviction notice for the Buckhead estate ready for service by noon tomorrow. I want a civil suit for breach of fiduciary duty prepared against my mother. And I want a criminal referral packet for Chad regarding the bank fraud and identity theft. I could hear the rapid clicking of his keyboard as he opened the files I had just compiled. There was a long silence on the line, a pause that spoke volumes coming from a man who had seen the worst of corporate greed. Then he let out a low whistle. "Aaliyah, this is scorched earth," he said, his voice tinged with a mix of shock and professional admiration. "This is not just a lawsuit, this is a demolition. You are going to bury them." "I know," I replied, leaning back in my chair. Draft it all, Sterling. I want the foreclosure process expedited. Since I am the title holder and the victim of the fraud, I can trigger the default clause immediately. Chad missed 3 payments to the bank while pretending to pay the mortgage. The bank was already preparing to move. I am just going to help them along. And Sterling. I added, my eyes fixing on the skyline beginning to lighten outside my window. I want a restraining order ready for Bianca, based on the poisoning attempt. I want her legally barred from coming within 500 feet of me or Dante. Sterling worked through the night with me remotely. We built a fortress of paper. Every document was a brick in the wall that would crush them. We drafted the confession of judgment for Chad to sign, knowing he would have no choice once he saw the evidence. We prepared the transfer deeds that would strip Mama Desiree of her remaining assets to pay back the money she had stolen from my accounts over the years. It was surgical. It was brutal. It was necessary. By dawn, we had a stack of documents thick enough to choke a horse. I printed them out on heavy bond paper, the printer rhythm soothing in the quiet room. The weight of the papers felt good in my hands. They were not just legal forms. They were my emancipation proclamation. I looked at the clock. It was 6 in the morning. The sun was rising over Atlanta, casting a deceptive pink glow over the city. My family was probably sleeping fitfully, terrified of what I might do, but still confident they could manipulate me one last time. They thought they were waking up to a negotiation. They thought they were going to bully a scared, confused daughter into submission. They had no idea they were waking up to an execution. I placed the documents in a leather briefcase and snapped the lock shut. The sound echoed in the quiet room like a gunshot. I was ready. The law was on my side. The evidence was on my side. And for the first time in my life, I was entirely on my side. I stared at the blinking cursor on my third monitor, waiting for the bank transfer window to load. It was 7 in the morning, and I was about to make the most expensive purchase of my life. But I was not buying a yacht or a private island. I was buying my family. Or more accurately, I was buying the chains that bound them. I had the vice president of risk management from Atlanta First National on the secure line. He sounded tired and confused. "Aaliyah," he said, his voice crackling through the speaker. "We do not usually sell individual distressed mortgage notes to private parties this quickly, especially when there is an active fraud investigation involved." I leaned into the microphone, my voice smooth and authoritative. "You do, when that private party is a platinum client who is offering to pay the full principal plus interest in cash within the hour. Do you want to spend 2 years in litigation over Chad-forged signature? Or do you want to clear this toxic asset off your books before the market opens?" There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "Send the wire," he said. I authorized the transfer. $2.5 million left my liquidity account. A moment later, a confirmation pinged. The mortgage on the Buckhead estate the house Mama Desiree strutted around in like a queen was no longer owned by the bank. It was owned by a holding company called Nemesis LLC, my holding company. I was now my mother landlord and creditor. She was living on my property on borrowed time, and she did not even know it yet. But I was not done. The bank was the easy part. The bank followed rules. Chad creditors did not. I opened a secure, encrypted messaging channel. Through my work in forensic accounting, I had contacts in the gray zones of finance, the people who bought bad debt from casinos and illegal bookmakers. Chad owed $5 million to a syndicate operating out of Macau. They were not known for their patience. I typed a message to the broker. "I want to purchase the debt of Chadwick Jameson Miller, full value, immediate wire." The response came back in seconds. "Why?" I typed back. "He is a family investment." The broker sent the routing number. I did not hesitate. I initiated the second transfer. It was a staggering amount of money, enough to fund a small startup or buy a fleet of luxury cars. But as I watched the progress bar fill green, I felt a rush of adrenaline stronger than any drug. The transfer completed. The broker sent the digital file containing Chad markers, his confession of debt, and the threatening leverage they held over him. It was all mine now. The guys who broke legs were paid off. Now Chad owed me. I sat back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. The transformation was complete. I was no longer the daughter they could guilt trip. I was no longer the sister they could envy. I was the institution. I owned the roof over their heads. I owned the debts that kept them awake at night. I owned their past mistakes and their future solvency. Mama Desiree thought she was the matriarch because she sat at the head of the table. Chad thought he was a player because he wore expensive suits, but in the world of finance, the person who holds the debt holds the power, and I held it all. I printed the transfer receipts and added them to the briefcase. The trap was not just set, it was welded shut. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against the mahogany desk. I expected it to be Sterling with another filed motion, but the caller ID stopped me cold. It was Otis, my father. We had not spoken much since he separated from Mama Desiree 3 years ago. She had poisoned him against me, telling him I was too busy with my career to care about family dinners, but deep down I knew he was just tired. Tired of her spending, tired of her drama. I swiped answer, putting him on speaker. Aaliyah, his voice was gruff, filled with the gravel of a man who had smoked too many cigars and swallowed too many insults. I heard about the ambulance. Is Bianca okay? The grapevine in Buckhead moved faster than fiber optics. Bianca is alive, Dad, I said, leaning back and rubbing my temples. She pumped her stomach. She will survive. He let out a sigh that sounded like a deflating tire. Good. That is good. Listen, Aaliyah. I am calling because something is wrong. Desiree called me yesterday. She was frantic. She was asking about my life insurance policy. She wanted to know if the beneficiaries were up to date. She asked if I could advance her next month's alimony payment because of some investment opportunity Chad found. It felt off, Aaliyah. She sounded desperate, dangerous. I closed my eyes. Even from a distance, he had sensed the rot. He knew his wife better than anyone. She was not investing, Dad. I told him, my voice flat. She was trying to pay off a hitman, or in this case, a loan shark. And when she could not get the money from you, she decided to extract it from me. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice rising. What happened tonight? I took a breath and told him. I told him about the wine, the bitter almonds, the abortifacient, the plan to lock me away. I did not sugarcoat it. I gave him the raw, ugly truth. There was silence on the line for a long time. Then I heard a sound that broke my heart. My father was crying. Not the loud, performative sobbing of my mother, but the quiet, hitching breath of a man realizing he had spent 30 years sleeping next to a monster. She tried to kill you, he whispered. She tried to kill my daughter for money. She did, Dad, I confirmed. And she is coming to my house tomorrow at noon to finish the job. She thinks I am going to sign over my rights. She thinks she won. I am coming over there, he roared, the grief replaced by a sudden volcanic anger. I am going to tear that house down brick by brick. No, Dad, I said sharply, cutting him off. Not yet. If you go there now, she will lie. She will spin it. She will make you the villain. I need you to be calm. I need you to be a witness. Come to the house tomorrow at noon. Enter through the back. Listen to what she says when she thinks no one is watching. Then, when I give the signal, you come out. I want you to see her without the mask. Can you do that? Otis breathed heavily into the phone. I will be there, he vowed. And God help her when I walk through that door. I hung up. The final piece was in place, the judge, the jury, and now the executioner. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. The hum of the servers had faded into the background, replaced by the rhythmic thud of my own heart. I sat in the darkness, illuminated only by the city lights of Atlanta sprawling below me like a grid of electric veins. My briefcase was packed, the evidence was secured, the trap was laid. But there was one final thing I needed to do before the sun rose. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. It was the only place in this fortress of technology and cold logic that held anything sentimental. I pulled out a small silver frame. It was a photograph taken 15 years ago at Disney World. I looked at the faces frozen in glossy color. There was Mama Desiree smiling that wide, charming smile that fooled the world, holding a younger Bianca who was dressed like a princess. My father Otis stood in the back, looking tired, but trying to be present. And there I was on the edge of the frame. I was 17 wearing a t-shirt I had bought from a thrift store because Mama said we could not afford souvenirs for me. I was smiling so hard, desperate to be included, desperate to be part of the magic. I remembered that day vividly. I remembered paying for the tickets with money I had saved from braiding hair and tutoring math. I remembered Mama telling me to stand further away so I would not block the castle. For years I had kept this photo as proof. Proof that we were a family. Proof that there were good times. But looking at it now under the harsh light of the monitors, I saw it for what it truly was. It was not a memory. It was a receipt. It was documentation of the first time I realized my love was a currency they spent without gratitude. I had paid for their happiness then, and I was paying for it now. The little girl in that picture was still inside me, begging for her mother to love her, begging for her sister to be her friend. That little girl was a liability. She was weak. She was the one who would hesitate tomorrow when Mama cried. She was the one who would sign the papers just to make the screaming stop. I picked up the silver Zippo lighter Dante had given me. It was heavy and cold in my hand. I flicked the lid open and struck the flint. The flame danced yellow and blue, a tiny destructive dancer. I slid the photo out of the frame. The paper felt fragile. I held the corner to the flame. The fire caught instantly, curling the edges, turning the smiles into ash. I watched Mama face blacken and disappear. I watched Bianca Princess dress dissolve into smoke. I watched the younger version of myself burn away. I did not feel sad. I felt lighter. I was not burning paper. I was cremating a delusion. I was cauterizing the wound they had left in my soul. I dropped the burning remnant into a metal wastebasket and watched until it was nothing but gray dust. The little girl who wanted to be loved was gone. In her place sat the CEO of Nemesis LLC, the woman who owned their debts, the woman who held the keys to their destruction. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The horizon was turning a bruised purple, signaling the dawn. Today was not just a Tuesday. Today was Judgment Day. I smoothed my silk blouse and checked my reflection in the glass. My eyes were dry. My hands were steady. I was ready for the slaughter. I pulled my Porsche into the circular driveway of the Buckhead estate at exactly noon. The house looked magnificent in the midday sun. The white columns gleamed, and the manicured lawns were a vibrant green. It was a picture of old money and stability. It was also a lie. I owned every brick, every blade of grass, and the people inside were merely squatters living on my charity. I grabbed my briefcase from the passenger seat. It felt heavy, not just with paper, but with the weight of the judgment I was about to deliver. I took a deep breath, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror. I did not look like a victim. I looked like the CEO of a company about to execute a hostile takeover. The housekeeper, Maria, let me in. She looked nervous, her eyes darting toward the formal living room. She knew the temperature in the house was freezing despite the summer heat. I walked into the salon, my heels making no sound on the Persian rugs. They were waiting for me. It looked like a tableau of the Last Supper if the disciples were vampires. Mama Desiree sat in her favorite wingback chair, looking every inch the matriarch. She was wearing a Chanel suit I had paid for her hair, perfectly coiffed. She held a cup of tea, but her eyes were hard and alert. Next to her sat Bianca. My sister looked terrible. Her skin was sallow, and she was wrapped in a cashmere blanket, shivering slightly from the after effects of the poison. But despite her frailty, her eyes burned with a feverish greed. She looked at me with a mixture of hatred and anticipation. And then there was Chad. He was lounging on the sofa, looking far too relaxed for a man who owed $5 million to the mob. He had a glass of scotch in his hand, my scotch from the private reserve, and a smug grin plastered on his face. He thought his problems were over. He thought the Bank of Aaliyah was open for business. On the coffee table in front of them sat a thick stack of documents. The contract, the shackles they had forged for me. "I am glad you are on time, Aaliyah," Mama Desiree said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We were so worried you might do something rash. Come sit down. We have tea." I remained standing. I did not want their tea. I did not want their comfort. I looked at the papers. "Is that it?" I asked. Chad leaned forward, tapping the stack with his manicured finger. "It is all here, Aaliyah. Just standard legal stuff. Power of attorney, asset management agreement, and a medical directive. We just want to make sure you are taken care of while you get well." Get well. That was their code for being locked away while they drained my accounts. Bianca coughed a wet hacking sound. "Just sign it," she rasped. "Stop dragging this out. I want to go back to bed." I looked at my sister. Even near death, she was entitled. She truly believed she deserved my life simply because she existed. I walked over to the table and looked down at the contract. The top page was titled General Power of Attorney. It granted Mama Desiree and Chad full control over my finances, my medical decisions, and my personal estate. It was a slavery contract dressed up in legal jargon. It even had a clause that allowed them to liquidate assets to cover necessary family expenses. In other words, to pay off Chad gambling debts. They watched me read it, holding their breath. The room was silent, filled only with the ticking of the grandfather clock and the palpable hunger of 3 parasites waiting to feed. They thought I was reading my surrender. They had no idea I was reading their obituary. Mama Desiree rose from her chair with the grace of a queen granting an audience. She reached into her purse and pulled out a fountain pen. It was black lacquer with gold trim. I recognized it immediately. It was a Mont Blanc I had bought for myself after closing my first major audit. I had left it here during Sunday dinner months ago, and she had stolen it. She uncapped it with a sharp click and held it out to me. The nib glinted in the sunlight streaming through the windows I paid for. "Sign it, Aaliyah," she said, her voice dropping to that husky register she used when she wanted to sound benevolent. "Sign it and I will forgive you. I will forgive you for trying to kill your own sister. I will forgive you for being so jealous and broken that you lashed out at the people who love you." I stared at the pen. The gaslighting was so thick I could almost taste it. She was offering me forgiveness for a crime she committed. She was offering to save me from a trap she had set. It was masterful. It was psychopathic. "And do not worry about the money," she continued, pressing the pen into my hand. Her fingers were cold and dry like parchment. "I know business stresses you out. I know you get confused with all those numbers. I will take that burden off your shoulders. I will manage everything. The house, the accounts, the investments. I will keep it all safe until the doctors say you are sane again. Until you are ready to be a part of this family properly." Chad chuckled from the sofa, swirling his scotch. "You should thank her, Aaliyah. Most mothers would have called the cops on a psycho killer. We are giving you a free pass, a nice vacation in the Swiss Alps. Just sign the damn paper and go get your head checked." Bianca nodded from her blanket cocoon. "Just do it," she whined. "Stop staring at it. I need to go to the pharmacy." My stomach hurts. I looked down at the document. The signature line waited for me, blank and demanding. If I signed this, I would cease to be a person. I would become a ward of the state, a ward of my mother. I would lose my company, my home, my freedom. They would pump me full of drugs in some remote facility while they drained every cent I had earned. They would wear my clothes, drive my cars, and erase my existence. I gripped the pen. I felt the weight of it. It was a tool of creation. I used it to sign contracts that built empires. They wanted me to use it to sign my own death warrant. I looked up at Mama Desiree. Her eyes were shining with victory. She thought she had broken me. She thought the little girl who craved approval was holding the pen. She did not see the executioner. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs. The moment of submission they were waiting for was actually the deep breath before the scream. I leaned over the table. I positioned the nib over the paper. They all leaned in. Chad sat up straighter. Bianca stopped shivering. Mama Desiree smiled a terrible, hungry smile. They were so close. They could almost smell the money. The Mont Blanc pen felt heavy in my hand, not like a writing instrument, but like a weapon. I looked at the gold nib glinting in the afternoon sun. Mama Desiree was leaning forward, her eyes wet with anticipation, not tears. She was ready to inherit my life. She was ready to consume me. I looked at the signature line. Aaliyah Marie Brooks. That name would cease to exist the moment ink touched paper. I would just be case number 492 in a mental health facility. I let a small whimper escape my throat just to feed their ego one last time. Mama nodded encouragingly, like she was coaxing a frightened dog. "Just do it, baby," she whispered. "Just let go." I stopped. I locked my wrist. The tremor in my hand vanished instantly. The air in the room seemed to freeze. I looked up from the paper. I let the fear drain from my face, leaving only the cold, hard granite of my true self. I saw the confusion flicker in Mama's eyes first. She sensed the shift in barometric pressure. She saw the mask fall. But it was too late. I raised the pen high, and I brought it down. Not in a scribbled signature, in a violent stab. The gold nib pierced through the 20-pound bond paper. It crunched into the antique mahogany table beneath. The sound was like a bone snapping. Black ink bled out onto the white page, spreading like a dark omen. Chad jumped so hard he spilled his scotch all over his lap. Bianca let out a shriek of surprise, clutching her blanket. Mama Desiree recoiled, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. I left the pen standing there, quivering in the wood like a dagger. I did not let go of it. I leaned forward, my face inches from Mama Desiree. I let a low, cold laugh escape my lips. It was not a nice laugh. It was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. "Do you really think I am that stupid?" I asked, my voice steady and devoid of all warmth. "Do you really think I would sign my life away to the people who tried to murder me?" Mama sputtered, trying to regain control, trying to find the narrative she had lost. "Aaliyah, baby, you are confused. You are having an episode." I stood up to my full height, pushing the chair back with a screech. The victim was gone. The forensic accountant was in the room. "I am not confused, Mother," I said, cutting her off, my voice slicing through her lies. "I am lucid. I am focused. And I am done playing your game. You thought you were trapping a mouse, but you just locked yourself in a cage with a tiger." I reached down and ripped the contract in half, right through the ink stain, the sound of tearing paper echoing in the silent room. I threw the pieces in her face. "The show is over. Now we look at the receipts." I turned my gaze to Chad. He was dabbing at his wet trousers with a cocktail napkin, trying to regain the swagger of the man who thought he had just won the lottery. He looked at the torn contract on the floor, then up at me with a sneer. "You are making a big mistake, Aaliyah," he blustered, trying to summon some authority. "We are the only ones standing between you and a straitjacket. If you do not sign that paper, I will personally call the district attorney and tell them you are a danger to society." I reached into my leather briefcase. The sound of the latches snapping open was loud in the tense room. I pulled out a thick blue folder. It was heavy with the weight of his sins. "Let us talk about danger, Chad," I said, my voice smooth and lethal. "Let us talk about the $5 million you lost on crypto futures last November. Let us talk about the $3 million you owe to the syndicate in Macau for your online poker addiction." Chad's face went from flushed to chalk white in a heartbeat. The napkin fluttered from his hand to the floor. "How do you know that?" he whispered. I did not answer him. Instead, I tossed the folder. It sailed across the coffee table and hit him square in the chest, sliding down to rest on his whiskey-soaked lap. "Open it," I commanded. He did not move, so I continued. "Inside that folder is a complete forensic audit of your finances. Every wire transfer to offshore accounts, every withdrawal from the joint accounts you share with my sister, every single penny you stole." And let us not forget the masterpiece on page 4. The mortgage application for this house. The one where you forged my signature to take out a $2 million line of credit against a property you do not own. Mama Desiree gasped. She knew about the debts, but she clearly did not know he had forged my name on federal documents. Bank fraud, Chad, I said, ticking the crimes off on my fingers. Wire fraud, identity theft, that is 20 years in federal prison minimum, and that is if the loan sharks do not get to you first. Chad started to shake. He looked at Mama Desiree, but she was staring at the wall, unable to look at him. I was going to pay it back, he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. Once I got access to your trust fund, I was going to pay it all off. No one would have known. I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. You were going to use my money to pay debts you incurred stealing from me. That is a fascinating business model, Chad. But I have some bad news for you. The bank does not care about your intentions, and neither do the men in Macau. But here is the twist. I leaned in closer, my shadow falling over him. They are not your problem anymore. I am. He looked up at me, confusion warring with terror. What do you mean? I smiled. It was the smile of a wolf standing over a trapped rabbit. I mean, I made some calls this morning. I called the bank. I called the debt buyers who handle the syndicate bad paper. I bought it all, Chad. Every single dollar. I bought the fraudulent mortgage note. I bought your gambling markers. You do not owe them anymore. You owe me. You owe me $5 million plus interest and penalties. And unlike the bank, I do not offer grace periods. I am calling the loan. Right now, pay me, Chad. Or I take everything you have left, starting with the clothes on your back. I turned my gaze to Bianca. She was huddled in her blanket, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear into the upholstery. She thought she was just collateral damage in Chad war. She thought her only crime was drinking a glass of wine she should not have touched. She was wrong. I picked up the silver remote control from the coffee table. You look confused, Bianca, I said, my voice soft and dangerous. You are wondering why I am being so mean to your husband. You are wondering if I know about your little side hustle. Bianca blinked, her eyes darting nervously. I do not know what you are talking about, she whispered. I just want to go home. You are home, I corrected her. Or at least you were until about 5 minutes ago. But let us talk about your work. Not your Instagram modeling. Your real work. The corporate espionage. I pressed the power button. The massive 80-inch television mounted above the fireplace flickered to life. I had mirrored my laptop screen to it. The image that filled the room was not a movie. It was a blown-up high-definition screenshot of an email chain. The subject line read, Insider Info. The recipient was Julian Thorne. Bianca let out a strangled gasp. Her hand flew to her mouth. There on the screen for everyone to see was her offer to sell Dante confidential client list and merger details for $50,000. There were photos of documents she had snapped while pretending to help clean up after dinner. There were audio files of private calls she had recorded. That is private, she shrieked, trying to stand up but failing. You hacked my email. You hacked my life, I shot back. You tried to sell out the man who was about to become your brother-in-law. You tried to destroy his firm. And for what, Bianca? To pay off a credit card bill at Neiman Marcus. You sold your family for a handbag. Mama Desiree looked at the screen, her mouth agape. Even she had limits, and betraying the powerful family we were trying to marry into was one of them. Bianca, what have you done? Mama whispered. I did not have to answer. The French doors at the back of the room opened. Dante stepped through. He was not wearing his tuxedo anymore. He was wearing a dark suit that made him look like the shark he was in the courtroom. He looked at Bianca with an expression of absolute disgust. It was the look one gives to a cockroach before crushing it. You know, Bianca, he said, walking into the center of the room, I used to think you were just vapid. I thought you were shallow but harmless. I was wrong. You are dangerous, and you are a felon. Bianca started to cry again, real tears of terror this time. Dante. Please, I was just desperate. I did not mean it. I never sent the really bad stuff. You sent enough, Dante said, his voice clipping the air like shears. Federal Trade Commission violations, corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets. My legal team is already drafting the complaint, but the legal trouble is the least of your worries. I made some calls this morning too. I called every modeling agency in Atlanta. I called the influencers you collaborate with. I told them exactly what you did. I sent them the proof. Your career is over, Bianca. You will never book a job in this town again. You will be lucky if you can get a job at a drive-through window when I am done with you. You are not just a bad sister. You are a liability, and you are finished. Mama Desiree looked from Chad to Bianca, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. She saw her army defeated. Chad was broken, his financial ruin laid bare on his lap. Bianca was sobbing, her career incinerated by her own greed. There was no one left to hide behind. So she did what she always did when cornered. She attacked. She rose to her feet, her face twisting into a mask of righteous indignation. "How dare you!" she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "How dare you come into my house and threaten us? I am your mother, Aaliyah. I gave you life. Everything you have is because of me. You are a sick, ungrateful little girl. I was trying to save you. I was trying to get you help because I love you." She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Her hands shook theatrically. She even managed to squeeze out a few tears. It was impressive. If I did not know better, I might have believed her. But I knew better. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was a simple movement, but it made her freeze. "You were not trying to save me, Mother," I said, my voice cutting through her shrieks like a razor blade. "You were trying to salvage your retirement plan. You were not worried about my sanity. You were worried about my bank balance. And just in case you try to deny it, let us listen to what you said when you thought I was unconscious." I tapped the screen. The volume was set to maximum. The sound of the hospital heart monitor filled the room, a rhythmic beeping that set the tempo for her destruction. Then her voice cut through the air. It was not the sweet public voice she used at garden parties. It was the cold, hissed whisper of the woman I knew in the dark. "Keep your voice down, you fool," the recording played. "The dosage was for her, not for you. We can still fix this. If we say it enough times, people will believe us. She is the unstable one. We get the power of attorney and the money is ours. Just make sure the doctors believe she is crazy." The recording echoed off the high ceilings, bouncing around the room like a trapped ghost. The words hung in the air, undeniable and damning. The dosage was for her. The money is ours. Mama Desiree's face went gray. The tears dried up instantly. She looked at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. "That is fake," she stammered, her voice trembling with genuine fear now. "You doctored that. You used AI. That is not me. No judge will admit that as evidence. It is illegal to record someone without their consent." I lowered the phone, but I did not turn it off. "You are right, Mama," I said calmly. "In a court of law, this might be inadmissible. But we are not in a court of law. We are in the court of public opinion. And more importantly, we are in the court of family. And there is one member of the jury you forgot about. You asked who would believe me. You asked who matters." I looked past her over her shoulder to the open archway leading to the kitchen. "Why do you not ask him yourself?" Mama turned around slowly, her movements jerky and stiff. Standing in the doorway was Otis, my father. He was holding his hat in his hands, his knuckles white. He was not the tired, beaten-down man who had left 3 years ago. He was a man waking up from a long nightmare. He had heard every word. He had heard the recording. He had heard her screams. He looked at the woman he had been married to for 30 years, and his eyes were filled with a profound, horrifying clarity. "Desiree," he said, his voice a low rumble like approaching thunder. "Tell me I did not just hear you admit to poisoning our daughter. Tell me right now before I tear this house apart." Mama Desiree opened her mouth to lie, but when she met his eyes, she knew it was over. The audience had left the building. The curtain had fallen, and she was standing alone on the stage with nothing but her sins. Otis moved into the room like a glacier, slow and unstoppable. His face was not red with rage. It was pale with the shock of the truth. He looked at the woman he had shared a bed with for 30 years, and it was as if he was seeing a stranger, a monster wearing his wife's skin. Mama Desiree backed away until her legs hit the edge of the sofa. "Otis, honey," she stammered, her voice pitching up into a desperate whine. "It is not what it sounds like. That recording is out of context. Aaliyah is manipulating you. You know how she gets. She is trying to turn you against me." Otis stopped just inches from her. He towered over her, a wall of silent fury. For decades he had been the quiet one, the one who worked double shifts to pay for her galas, the one who stayed in the background while she played the socialite queen. But the quiet man had finally reached his limit. He did not yell. His voice was a low, terrifying rumble that seemed to shake the crystal glasses on the sidebar. "I heard everything, Desiree. I stood in that hallway, and I listened to you admit to poisoning my child. I heard you plotting to steal her money while she was fighting for her life. I stood there and I listened to you destroy the last shred of respect I had for you." Mama Desiree reached out to touch his arm, a desperate attempt to charm the man she had controlled for so long. "Otis, please," she whispered, tears leaking from her eyes. "We can fix this. Just let me explain. It was an accident." Otis recoiled from her touch as if she were made of fire. "Do not touch me," he roared. The sound was so loud, so raw, that even Chad stopped breathing. Otis raised his hand, and for a split second I thought he was going to strike her. Mama flinched, squeezing her eyes shut, bracing for the impact she surely deserved. But Otis did not hit her. He did something far more painful. He reached for his left hand. He grabbed the gold wedding band that had sat on his finger for 3 decades, the symbol of his loyalty, the symbol of the family he tried to build. He twisted it violently, pulling it over the knuckle. With a guttural cry of disgust, he threw the ring. It flew through the air and hit Mama Desiree square in the chest before falling to the floor with a sharp metallic ping. It spun on the hardwood, a dying, dizzying sound before coming to a stop at her feet. "That is it," Otis said, his breathing heavy and ragged. "We are done. I am filing for divorce first thing in the morning. And do not think you are getting a dime of alimony. Attempted murder tends to void prenup agreements, Desiree. I am cutting you off. The credit cards, the allowance, the health insurance. It is all gone. You wanted money so badly you were willing to kill our daughter for it. Now you have nothing, not a single cent." He looked at her with cold, dead eyes, eyes that had once looked at her with love. "You are on your own, Desiree. You and your greed can keep each other warm, because I am finished paying for your sins." The silence that followed my father's departure was heavy and suffocating. The wedding ring lay on the Persian rug, a glittering circle of gold that marked the end of an era. Mama Desiree stared at it, her face stripped of all its usual arrogance. She looked old. She looked defeated. But I was not done. I had stripped them of their pride, their reputation, and their future income. Now it was time to take the stage they performed on. I looked around the room. I looked at the silk drapes I had paid for. I looked at the antique vase Chad had bought with stolen funds. This house was not a home. It was a monument to their greed, and it was built on a foundation of lies. I walked to the center of the room, my heels clicking on the hardwood, with a sound like a gavel striking a bench. I gestured to the walls around us. "You all seem to be under the impression that you still have a roof over your heads," I said, my voice echoing in the large salon. "You seem to think that because you have lived here like royalty for 20 years that this belongs to you." I turned to Chad, who was still slumped on the sofa holding his chest. "Let us revisit that mortgage application, Chad. The one where you practiced my signature until you got it right. You used my name and my credit to secure the loan against this property. Under the law, since the signature is a forgery, the mortgage contract is technically voidable." Chad looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "So the debt is gone?" he asked, his voice trembling. I laughed. It was a harsh sound. "No, Chad. The contract is void, meaning the bank has no claim on the title. But the money you took is still gone. And since I paid the bank off this morning, I now hold the note. But more importantly, since the mortgage is invalid, the ownership reverts fully and completely to the name on the deed." I paused, letting the reality sink in. "And whose name is on the deed, Mother?" Mama Desiree looked up, her eyes wide with horror. "It is your name," she whispered. It was the first honest thing she had said all day. "Exactly," I replied. "My name. Not yours. Not Chad. Mine. This is my house. It has always been my house. You were just guests here. Guests who abused their host. Guests who stole from their host. And worst of all, guests who tried to murder their host." I checked my watch. It was a Patek Philippe, another thing I had bought for myself instead of giving them the money. I tapped the crystal face. "I am terminating your residency, effective immediately. I am evicting you." Mama Desiree let out a wail. "You cannot do that. This is my home. Where will I go?" "I do not care," I said, my voice ice cold. "Go to a hotel. Go to a shelter. Go to hell for all I care. But you are not staying here. I am giving you 30 minutes, half an hour to pack your bags. And I mean only your bags. The furniture stays. The art stays. The electronics stay. Those were bought with my money, so they are my property. You take your clothes and your toiletries and you get out." Bianca started to cry again, pulling her blanket tighter. "But I am sick, Aaliyah. I cannot move." I looked at her without an ounce of pity. "You seemed well enough to spy on Dante. You seemed well enough to plot against me. Adrenaline is a wonderful drug, Bianca. I suggest you use it. You have 29 minutes left. If you are not on the other side of that gate when the timer runs out, I am calling the police. And I will not be calling them for a noise complaint. I will be handing them the forgery evidence, the wire fraud files, and the toxicology report. So you have a choice. You can leave in an Uber, or you can leave in handcuffs. The choice is yours." Panic finally set in, real visceral panic. Chad scrambled up from the sofa, tripping over his own feet as he ran toward the stairs. Mama Desiree looked at me one last time, searching for the daughter she had manipulated for years. She found only a stranger. She grabbed her purse and ran after Chad. Bianca threw off her blanket and stumbled toward her room, wailing. I stood alone in the center of the living room. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of expensive lilies and victory. I walked over to the front door and opened it wide. I wanted to watch them leave. I wanted to see the backs of the parasites as they scuttled away into the sun. My house was finally going to be clean. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed, marking the final minutes of the countdown. Mama Desiree and Bianca were already outside, standing by their pile of luggage, looking like refugees in designer clothing. They were defeated, broken, by the reality that their free ride had come to a violent end. But Chad was not outside. He was standing at the bottom of the grand staircase, his breathing ragged and loud in the quiet house. He had a duffel bag at his feet, but he was not picking it up. He was staring at me. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with the red desperation of a man who knows he is walking out the door and into a death sentence. The loan sharks knew where he lived. Without my money to protect him, he was a dead man walking. "You ruined my life," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and hatred. "You took everything." I tried to reason with him one last time. "I did not ruin you, Chad. You ruined yourself. You gambled away your future. Now pick up your bag and leave before I call the authorities." He let out a laugh, a high-pitched sound that bordered on madness. "The authorities. They are the least of my problems, Aaliyah. The people coming for me are going to do things worse than prison. And it is all your fault. If you had just signed the paper, if you had just died in that ambulance, none of this would be happening." His hand went into his pocket. The movement was jerky, unnatural. I saw the glint of metal before my brain registered what it was. It was a switchblade, a nasty, serrated thing he probably carried to feel tough. He flicked it open, the blade locking into place with a sinister click. I froze. The distance between us was less than 10 feet. He looked at me with the eyes of a cornered animal, deciding that if he was going down, he was taking the cause of his misery with him. "You want me dead?" he snarled, saliva flying from his lips. "Then let us make it official." He lunged. He moved faster than I expected, propelled by pure adrenaline and rage. I stumbled back, my heel catching on the rug. I saw the knife coming down, aimed straight for my chest. I braced for the pain. I braced for the end, but the blow never landed. A dark blur moved across my vision. Dante. He did not shout. He did not panic. He moved with the precision of a coiled spring, releasing its energy. He stepped in between me and the blade, catching Chad's wrist in midair. There was a sickening crunch as Dante twisted Chad's arm back against the joint. Chad screamed, dropping the knife. It clattered uselessly onto the hardwood floor. But Dante was not done. He used Chad's own momentum against him, pivoting his hips and executing a perfect judo throw. Chad's body flew through the air, slamming onto the floor with a bone-shaking thud. The air left his lungs in a wheezing gasp. Before he could scramble away, Dante was on top of him, his knee pressed firmly into the small of Chad's back, pinning him to the ground like an insect. "Stay down!" Dante growled, his voice vibrating with a lethal calm. "Give me a reason to break your arm. I am begging you." Chad struggled weakly, moaning into the carpet, but the fight had left him. And then came the sound I had been waiting for. Sirens. They started as a distant wail and grew louder rapidly, filling the driveway with a chaotic symphony of justice. Blue and red lights flashed through the open front door, bouncing off the walls of my reclaimed home. Officers swarmed into the hallway, guns drawn, shouting commands. I watched as they hauled Chad up from the floor. They cuffed his hands behind his back, the metal ratcheting tight. He looked at me one last time as they dragged him out. There was no arrogance left, only terror. He was going to prison, but in his eyes I saw the realization that prison might be the safest place for him now. The parasite had been removed. The house was finally safe. The scene outside my front door was a chaotic symphony of justice, and I savored every note. Chad was the first to go. Two burly officers hauled him toward the cruiser, his feet dragging against the pavement. He was sobbing loudly, begging Dante to drop the charges, promising to pay back every cent if we just gave him more time. It was pathetic to watch the man who had threatened to kill me 5 minutes ago reduced to a weeping mess. The officer slammed the door on his pleas, cutting off his noise. I watched through the window as he slumped against the glass, his face a mask of absolute defeat. He had gambled his life and rolled snake eyes. Then it was Bianca's turn. She was standing by the fountain, arguing with a female officer. I could hear her shrill voice from the porch. "You do not understand," she shrieked. "I am a public figure. I have a brand deal next week. You cannot arrest me. It will ruin my engagement metrics." The officer was unimpressed. She spun Bianca around and slapped the handcuffs on her wrists. The cold steel clashed against her gold Cartier bracelets, the only real jewelry she owned. Dante walked over and handed the officer a thick envelope containing the evidence of her espionage and blackmail. Bianca saw the exchange and her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the driveway, weeping not for her crimes, but for the realization that there would be no more photo shoots, no more parties, just a concrete cell and a prison jumpsuit that definitely would not flatter her figure. But the grand finale was Mama Desiree. She was trying to walk down the driveway with her head held high, clutching her oversized orange Hermes Birkin bag like it was the crown jewels. She truly believed that if she just walked with enough confidence, the police would part like the Red Sea. She was wrong. A detective stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Desiree Brooks," he said, his voice loud and authoritative. "You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Aaliyah Brooks and conspiracy to commit fraud. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Mama's eyes went wide. She looked at Otis, who was standing by his truck, his arms crossed. "Otis, tell them," she screamed. "Tell them who I am. Tell them this is a mistake." Otis just looked at her with eyes full of pity and disgust, then slowly turned his back. That was the moment she broke. The detective reached for her arm and she snapped, not at the officer, but at the attempt to separate her from her purse. No, she howled, clutching the leather straps with white knuckles. You cannot take this. It is a Birkin. It is worth $40,000. Do not touch it. It was a grotesque display of vanity. She was facing life in prison, yet she was fighting for a handbag. The officer did not have time for her tantrums. He wrenched the bag from her grip and tossed it carelessly onto the grass. Mama Desiree let out a guttural scream as if he had thrown a child. My bag, she wailed, struggling as the cuffs clicked shut. My bag! Look what you did to it! They dragged her kicking and screaming toward the waiting van. She looked back at me one last time, her mascara running down her face, her hair wild and matted. I did not look away. I raised my hand and gave her a small little wave. The doors slammed shut, the sirens wailed, and just like that, the house was quiet. The driveway was empty save for a lone orange handbag lying in the dirt, a symbol of a life that was nothing but an expensive fake. The sirens faded into the distance, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. The drama was over. The arrests were made. The criminals were gone. But the evidence of their parasitic existence remained scattered throughout my home. I stood on the porch watching the last police cruiser disappear around the bend. Dante stood beside me, his hand resting warm and solid on the small of my back. He did not say a word. He knew that the war was won, but the cleanup had just begun. I checked my watch. I had told them they had 30 minutes to vacate. They had left in handcuffs instead. That meant the timeline had moved up. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the number of the crew I had staged 2 blocks away. You are clear to come in, I said into the receiver. Bring the truck, bring the dumpster, and bring the heavy-duty trash bags. 5 minutes later, a caravan of white vans pulled into the driveway. This was not a delicate moving service. This was a foreclosure cleanup crew, the kind I used for seized commercial properties. They were used to dealing with hoarders and bankrupt businesses. They did not care about sentimentality. They cared about efficiency. The foreman, a burly man named Mike, walked up to me, clipping a radio to his belt. What is the plan, Ms. Brooks? He asked, looking at the grand house. I pointed to the open front door. I want everything personal gone. I said, my voice steady and calm. Clothes, toiletries, knickknacks, gadgets. If it is loose and it belongs to them, it goes. Strip the closets, clear the drawers, empty the bathroom cabinets. Do not pack it in boxes, put it in bags, and dump it on the lawn. Mike nodded, signaling his men. They swarmed the house like a colony of efficient ants. I walked back into the living room and sat on the arm of the sofa watching the purge begin. It was violent and beautiful. The first things to go were Mama Desiree's precious furs. I watched as a mover walked out with an armful of mink and chinchilla coats. These were the coats she wore to church while telling everyone how much she sacrificed for her family. He did not fold them. He did not hang them. He threw them onto the asphalt of the driveway like they were dirty rags. They landed in a heap, a soft mound of dead animal skins that suddenly looked incredibly cheap in the harsh sunlight. Next came Bianca's room. The movers brought out armloads of designer dresses, still with the tags on. Dresses I had paid for. Dresses she had bought with my credit card to impress strangers on the internet. They flew through the air, landing on top of the furs. Then came the makeup. Hundreds of plastic compacts, glass bottles of perfume, and curling irons were dumped into black contractor bags. The sound of glass breaking as the bags hit the ground was music to my ears. It was the sound of her vanity shattering. She had spent hours in front of the mirror painting a fake face to hide her ugly soul. Now her tools were nothing but broken glass and spilled powder dusting the inside of a garbage bag. Chad Man Cave was the next target. I walked to the window to watch this part specifically. A mover emerged carrying a set of golf clubs, custom-made, titanium drivers. They cost more than my first car. The mover tossed the bag. It hit the driveway with a metallic clatter, clubs spilling out and rolling into the grass. Then came the humidor filled with Cuban cigars. It smashed open, scattering expensive tobacco into the dirt. The gaming computer he used to lose millions on crypto was hauled out and unceremoniously dropped onto the pile. The monitor cracked, the tower dented. The altar of his addiction was dismantled in seconds. I walked out onto the lawn to inspect the growing mountain of excess. It was staggering. There were hundreds of shoes, dozens of handbags, silk scarves, cashmere sweaters, electronic gadgets that had never been opened. It was a monument to gluttony, a physical manifestation of how deeply they had drained me. For years I had worked 18-hour days staring at spreadsheets until my eyes burned just to fund this, just to buy this pile of garbage that they did not even appreciate. They had taken my sweat and turned it into things. Things they used to mask their insecurity. Things they used to pretend they were better than everyone else. One of the movers hesitated, holding a jewelry box. "This looks expensive, ma'am," he said, holding up a diamond necklace. "Do you want to keep this inside?" I looked at the necklace. I recognized it. I had bought it for Mama for her 60th birthday. She had looked at it, sneered, and asked why the stones were not bigger. "No," I said coldly. "Throw it on the pile." "But it is diamond," he protested. "It is cubic zirconia," I lied smoothly. "It is fake. Just like the woman who wore it." He shrugged and tossed the velvet box onto the heap of clothes. I did not let them keep a single thing. Not a photograph, not a diary, not a sentimental trinket. If I had paid for it, I owned it, and I chose to discard it. I was scrubbing their DNA from the premises. I wanted to walk into a room and not smell Mama perfume. I wanted to open a closet and not see Chad tacky suits. I wanted the house to be a blank slate. As the pile grew, neighbors started to slow their cars as they drove past. They stared at the spectacle. The Grand Brooks estate with a mountain of trash on the front lawn. Mama Desiree would have died of shame. She lived for the approval of these neighbors. She lived to maintain the illusion of perfection. Now her dirty laundry, literally and figuratively, was aired out for all of Buckhead to see. Let them look, I thought. Let them see the rot that was hiding behind the columns. After 45 minutes, the house was silent again. The crew stood back, wiping sweat from their brows. The pile on the driveway was massive, a chaotic jumble of color and wealth reduced to refuse. Mike the foreman looked at me. "What do you want us to do with it now?" he asked. "Do we load it into the truck for donation?" I looked at the mound. I saw a red silk dress Bianca wore the night she tried to seduce Dante. I saw the golf shoes Chad wore when he lied about being at a business meeting. I saw the shawl Mama wore when she told me I was unlovable. Burn it, I wanted to say, but that would be illegal and I was done breaking laws. I was the law now. "Take it to the dump," I said. "All of it. Do not donate it. Do not sell it. I do not want anyone else wearing this bad karma. Crush it. Bury it. I will pay the extra disposal fee." Mike nodded, signaling the driver. They began to shovel the expensive Italian leather and French silk into the back of a dirty garbage truck. The compactor whirred, crushing $40,000 handbags into cubes of trash. I watched until the last item was gone. The driveway was empty. The grass was a little trampled, but it would grow back. I turned to Dante, who had been watching me with a look of intense pride. "It is done," I whispered. He smiled and wrapped his arm around my shoulders. "It is done," he agreed. "You are free, Aaliyah." I looked at the house. It looked different. The windows seemed brighter. The air seemed lighter. The ghosts were gone. They had been exorcised not by a priest, but by a forensic accountant and a moving crew. I took Dante's hand and walked back up the steps. I did not look back at the empty driveway. I walked through the front door, and for the first time in my life, I closed it on a home that was entirely mine. The gavel struck the mahogany-sounding block with a finality that echoed through the packed courtroom, marking the end of a 6-month legal marathon. It was a crisp autumn morning outside, but inside the air was stale and heavy with judgment. Chadwick Jameson Miller stood before the bench, his shoulders slumped in a cheap suit provided by his public defender. The arrogant gambler who had sneered at me in my living room was gone. In his place was a broken man terrified of the future. The judge did not mince words. For the counts of bank fraud, identity theft, and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, Chad was sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. When the verdict was read, Chad did not cry. He simply closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. He knew what awaited him. Prison was harsh, but the world outside was worse. The Macau syndicate was still looking for their $5 million. In a twisted irony, the concrete walls of the federal prison were the only things protecting him from a much more violent fate. I watched as the bailiffs cuffed him. He looked back at the gallery, scanning for a friendly face, but found none. He looked at me one last time and saw only the impassive face of the woman who had bested him. The side door opened, and he was led away, the heavy clanking of chains marking his exit from society. For Mama Desiree and Bianca, the punishment was different, but in many ways it was far more cruel. The judge had been lenient with prison time, granting them suspended sentences and 5 years of strict probation, citing their lack of prior criminal history. They avoided the cage, but they could not escape the stigma. They were felons now. Their names were permanently stained in every database and every social circle in Atlanta. The headline of the local paper had run the story for weeks, detailing their greed and their betrayal. The Buckhead community did not just reject them, it erased them. They were uninvited from the galas, banned from the clubs, and whispered about in every salon they used to frequent. I saw them a few weeks later. I was leaving a late meeting at a corporate center downtown, a building my firm had just finished auditing. As I walked through the lobby, I saw a cleaning crew working the night shift. I almost walked past without noticing until a familiar motion caught my eye. There, wearing a shapeless blue uniform with a name tag that read, "Trainee," was Mama Desiree. She was on her hands and knees scrubbing a stubborn coffee stain out of the carpet. Her manicured nails were gone, replaced by red chapped skin, irritated by industrial cleaners. She looked older, her face sagging with exhaustion, the fire of her narcissism extinguished by the cold water of reality. A few feet away, Bianca was Windexing the glass of the revolving doors. The girl who had dreamed of being a supermodel was now invisible to the businessmen rushing past her. One man on a cell phone bumped into her, spilling a drop of his drink on the floor she had just cleaned. He did not apologize. He did not even look at her. Bianca just sighed, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand, and knelt down to clean it up. She looked defeated, stripped of her pretenses. They had wanted to live off my hard work without lifting a finger. Now they would spend the rest of their lives working their fingers to the bone just to survive. I stood there for a moment, watching them through the glass. I felt no anger. I felt no pity. I simply felt done. I turned my back on the cleaning crew and walked out into the cool night air, getting into my car and driving away toward a future that was finally entirely my own. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold. It was the kind of sunset you see in movies, but this was real. I stood in the small bridal suite of the Vineyard Cottage, smoothing the silk of my dress. It was not the puffy, rhinestone-encrusted ball gown Mama Desiree had picked out for me months ago. It was sleek, simple, and elegant. It was me. The room was quiet. There was no screaming, no demands for money, no passive-aggressive comments about my weight. Just the soft hum of anticipation and the gentle rustle of leaves outside the window. The door opened, and Otis stepped in. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, the lines of worry that had etched his face for years, finally beginning to soften. He held out his arm, his eyes shining with tears. "You look beautiful, Aaliyah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not because of what you are wearing, but because of who you are." I took his arm, feeling the strength in it. For the first time in my life, I was not walking on eggshells with my family. I was walking on solid ground. We stepped out of the cottage and began the walk toward the garden where the ceremony was held. There were no hundreds of guests. No business associates Mama wanted to impress. No paparazzi Bianca had tipped off. Just 50 people. My college roommate. My team from Chimera Analytics. Dante brothers. People who loved us for who we were, not what we could give them. As I walked down the grassy aisle, I looked at the faces turning to smile at me. I saw genuine joy. I saw support. I realized with a sudden jolt of clarity what was missing. There was no tension. There was no fear that someone would make a scene. There was no one checking their watch or calculating the cost of the flower arrangements. The toxicity had been surgically removed. Mama Desiree and Bianca were miles away, scrubbing floors and living with the consequences of their actions. Their absence was not a void. It was a blessing. It was the clean, fresh air after a long storm. I reached the altar and took Dante's hands. They were warm and steady, the same hands that had held back a knife to save my life. He looked at me with an intensity that made the rest of the world fade away. We did not recite the generic vows Mama had scripted. We spoke from the heart. I promised to trust him. He promised to protect me. And as he slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I had been carrying since childhood. It was the weight of obligation, the weight of buying love. It was gone. The reception was a blur of dancing and laughter. I sat at the head table watching my father laugh at a joke told by Dante's best man. I looked at my husband, who was watching me with a quiet smile. I raised my glass of champagne. This time I drank it without fear. I tasted the bubbles, I tasted the sweetness, and mostly I tasted the freedom. I was no longer the bank. I was no longer the victim. I was Aaliyah. I had burned the old portrait to ashes, and from those ashes I had built a life that was finally honestly mine. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The engine of my new Aston Martin purred beneath me, a low rumble of contained power that vibrated through the leather seat. It was a rainy Tuesday in Atlanta, the kind of gray afternoon where the sky seemed to press down on the city. Inside the cabin, however, the climate was perfectly controlled, set to a comfortable 70 degrees. Soft jazz played through the speakers, drowning out the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the windshield. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling the cool, smooth surface under my palms. This car was a gift to myself. A reminder that I was no longer the bank for everyone else. I was the driver of my own destiny. I pulled up to a red light at an intersection near the edge of the city. This was a part of town I rarely visited, a place of cracked sidewalks and faded billboards. To my right, there was a bus stop. It was a miserable structure, just a concrete bench under a plastic shelter that had been cracked by vandalism and age. Rainwater dripped through the roof, creating muddy puddles around the feet of the people waiting there. I idly turned my head to look, not really seeing them at first, just registering shapes in the gloom. But then a movement caught my eye. A flash of familiar manic energy. There were two women huddling under the leaking shelter. One was wearing a plastic yellow poncho that was torn at the shoulder. The other was wrapped in a soaking wet hoodie, shivering violently. I squinted through the tinted glass. It was them, Mama Desiree and Bianca. They looked like ghosts of the people they used to be. Mama's face was gaunt, stripped of the makeup that used to function as her armor. Her hair, once a helmet of hairspray, was plastered to her skull in wet gray strands. Bianca looked even worse. The girl who refused to leave the house without designer sunglasses was now wearing worn-out sneakers that looked 2 sizes too big. They were not comforting each other. They were not huddled together for warmth against the bitter cold. They were fighting. Mama was clutching a paper bag tightly to her chest while Bianca clawed at it. I watched as the bag tore open. A stale, half-eaten baguette fell out, tumbling into the dirty rainwater on the pavement. Bianca screamed, her mouth twisting into an ugly shape, and shoved Mama's shoulder. Mama shoved back, slapping Bianca hand away with a desperation I had never seen before. They scrambled for the bread, neither of them caring that it was soaked in mud. They looked like feral animals fighting over scraps. The light on the dashboard turned green. I could have rolled down the window. I could have offered them a ride. I could have handed them $100 bill, which would have meant the world to them now. A year ago, the old Aaliyah would have done exactly that. She would have felt guilty. She would have tried to save them from the hell they had created for themselves. But that Aaliyah was dead. She had burned in the fire of their betrayal. I reached up and adjusted my oversized sunglasses, sliding them up the bridge of my nose. I looked at them one last time. I did not feel pity. I did not feel anger. I felt nothing but a profound sense of balance. The universe had corrected itself. They were exactly where they belonged, and so was I. A small, satisfied smile touched my lips. I shifted gears and pressed my foot down on the accelerator. The engine roared a sound like a beast waking up. The car surged forward, leaving the bus stop and the miserable figures behind in a spray of mist. I did not check the rearview mirror. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, where the clouds were breaking and the sun was just beginning to shine. The most powerful lesson from Aaliyah's story is that sharing DNA does not give anyone the license to abuse you. We often grow up believing we owe our family unconditional loyalty, but true love should never come at the cost of your survival. Aaliyah proved that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary act of self-respect. You have the absolute right to protect your peace, your finances, and your future from anyone who tries to drain them, even if they raised you. Remember that toxic patterns only end when you decide to stop participating in them. If this story satisfied your craving for justice, make sure to subscribe for more.